Good morning and welcome to Peace Out, where we are all learning together to peace out. And I did pretty good at it yesterday. I really did. A time or two, not all day long, but at least a time or two. And progress is progress, right? Oh man, I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about this morning. We've been talking about some of the different miracles that God performed this week. We've been talking about how he used natural stuff. And so I titled today's devotion Natural Process because God doesn't have to have the natural process, right? Now that may sound kind of funny. I don't know. We're going to dive into this miracle here and go, man, God went way above and beyond what they could even have imagined to provide for a widow in 2 Kings chapter 4. The story goes like this. The lady's husband died. She had, I don't know how many sons. Sons, she said sons. I say at least two. I don't know if it said how many. Two sons, yes, two sons. So what happened was her husband was a prophet, just like Elisha. It said he served with Elisha. And so he was a man of God. He feared God. We would call him, on this side of the cross, he would be a believer, right? And he made a debt and then he died. And so now the creditors have come, and back in the Bible days, if you owed a debt, you became their slave. You be literally, in the sense, when we make a debt today, we still we're a slave to that debt because we've got to work to pay it off, right? But back then they could take you as a slave if you couldn't pay the debt in real money, right? Or pay it off in a timely fashion. You became their slave. So they had come to collect her two sons to make them slaves to pay off the debt that the man owed. She was in a bind. The widow was in a bind. So here she is. She's lost her husband, and now she's at a risk of losing her sons. And Elisha comes. The widow came to Elisha and said, "Please help. Is there anything you can do?" And that's where the story unfolds. Now, there's only 7 verses in this little story right here, but it's got some really good stuff. Okay. First off, it said the man of God, the prophet that died, he served God. He loved the Lord. He feared the Lord, it says. But he made a debt. Elisha didn't say, well, he made the debt. Just, I don't know. That's just on you. You're just going to have to deal with it. Go get a job. Go get a job, right? Which that wasn't. Their economic system was very different than ours, right? Their whole economy was different. They bartered more and all of that. But anyway, and so he didn't say, well, he shouldn't have made the debt. He didn't condemn the man. He didn't say, oh, he messed y'all all up. No, he didn't even address that. The scripture here says that he was a husband who feared God, who served with the prophet, and he was a prophet, and now he's gone. There was no condemnation. Elisha said, well, he put you in a bind, man. I don't know what you're going to do. Yeah, that's a tough spot, right? He didn't say any of those things. He just said this, what can I do to help you? And then he didn't even answer that question. He just said, what can I do to help you? Because it was like he was trying to figure out, maybe sometimes when I'm asking questions inside, I'm praying. I don't know what to do, but God, show me some direction. God, give me some. And all of a sudden it came to Elisha, and I'm reading some things into this, right? But then he says, what do you have in the house? Now, the reason this question stood out to me in this story is that in our other 2 stories that we've looked at this week, the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus says, what do you have? And they said, well, we have loaves and fishes, right? And in yesterday's story, gosh, I don't even remember what it was right this second. Somebody tell me what it was real quick. Moses. That was the other story. It was Moses. One of the other stories we talked about this week, Bible stories, was Moses. And God said, what do you have in your hand? God used what they had right there in that moment to do a miracle. And he's going to do it again right here in 2 Kings 4. He said, what do you have in your house? And she said, well, all I have is a little flask of oil. Why would that come to mind? What do you have in your house? Well, I have a TV. I have a piano. I have a flask of oil. Maybe that was the only thing that she felt had any kind of monetary value at all. I don't know. But he said, what do you have? What do you have in your hand? What do you have at your disposal? What do you have accessible to you right now? Total natural question. Nothing supernatural about it. Nothing spiritualized about it. Just what do you have physically right now? And she said, I have a flask of olive oil. And Elisha said, borrow as many empty jars as you can and gather them all to your house. Go to all your friends, all your neighbors, find as many empty jars as possible. And here's the thing, they did it. Her sons went from house to house and borrowed empty jars and filled her house with empty jars. They had to just be standing there looking at all these empty jars going, don't know what this is going to do. I don't know what this is about, but we're going to obey. And sometimes we find ourselves in those places. The scripture maybe didn't quite make sense. Maybe we don't know how God's going to bring some glory out of this, or we don't know how he's going to give us peace in something, or we don't understand how things are going to unfold. We're just standing around with a whole bunch of empty stuff going, I don't know what's going on here, but I know God's going to help me. There's that moment of trust when you're looking at the stuff you don't get. It's okay. It's okay to look at stuff and not get it and still trust God. If you had it all figured out, you wouldn't need to trust God, or you'd think you wouldn't need to trust God, right? So they didn't have it all figured out. They stood there, and then he said, start filling the jars. He said, start filling the jars and setting them aside. And she took that one little flask of olive oil and she filled a jar. That had to be cool, but it's not empty. Fill another jar. It's not empty. Fill another jar. It's still not empty. How excited was she? I would say about the third jar, I'd have lost it. Wow, this is so cool. And they filled all the jars, all the containers they had, bowls, containers, whatever they had, full of olive oil from one little flask. Now, here's the cool part. Now, that's a cool miracle. There's any way you slice it, that's cool. It's supernatural or above what you could do in the natural, and it's just cool. God is just cool. He's got some cool stuff going on, right? I love that story. But here's the thing. You can't just make olive oil. I mean, just the fact, if God just had a tree grow and then it produced olives real fast, and then you have to take the olives and go press them to get the oil, right? God skipped the process. He skipped the natural process because you can't just go get oil. Like, when they struck the rock, Moses struck the rock and they got water. The water flows. It's a natural process. It's a big deal because they didn't have water and then they did, but it didn't skip any natural processes. Water just flowed. It just kind of came, right? But this skipped a whole bunch of time. This shows me that God's not bound by time. He's not constrained by time. He doesn't measure time like us. We're the ones that decided how to measure the day into 24 hours in 24 equal increments, right? Of 60 seconds, 60 minutes each of those of 60 seconds. We did all that. God didn't say, okay, you've got an hour or you've got a minute, right? God doesn't measure time like we do, but he skipped the time part of this. He wasn't constrained by, well, we've got to grow a tree. We've got to let it grow some olives. We've got to get those. Then we've got to harvest the olives at just the right time. And then we've got to go take those olives and press. No, he showed that he was beyond time in this story. The same thing when Jesus turned the water into wine. Remember, that was his very first miracle. And I always thought that was so odd. But when I started studying kind of this time stuff that I really like to get into sometimes, the quantum stuff, I love that kind of stuff. I'm not real smart at it, but I like it. And I read it and go, that's cool. I don't get it, but that's cool, right? And I was looking at this time continuum thing, the time thing, and I'm like, God's not constrained by time. That was the coolest thing about the miracle at the turning the water into wine at Cana when Jesus went to the wedding, was he wasn't bound by time. He turned water into wine. First of all, you can't make wine out of water. Now, I ain't never made no wine, but I'm pretty sure you got to have some fruit. You got to have the fermentation process. It's a process. Jesus skipped the process and made water wine. He said, time does not constrain me. I'm not bound by time. I'm above time. I made time. We feel constrained. We've got to get this done by 5. I've got to get this done by in the morning. I've only got so many years left to live. I've got to get all this crammed into my life, exciting life to get it done. We feel the constraints and almost a bondage of time. God doesn't feel that. Time didn't tell God, you can't just make more olive oil. Time didn't tell Jesus, you can't just make wine and just pour water in there and there's wine. Jesus was showing and demonstrating, and this miracle here demonstrates that time's processes don't dictate to God. God said, we need olive oil. boom, there's olive oil. Now, there was another story that God did this actually with Elisha. There's another lady, and he came and he asked her to make bread. And she said, well, all I have is enough to make one bread for me and my son, one loaf of bread for me and my son, and then we're going to die. And her flask didn't go dry, and her wheat, her meal, whatever she used, didn't run out throughout a whole famine. God's not bound by time. Our thinking is we have so many things in our mind that we can't think past because we're bound by it. But God was not bound by time, and he made the oil just flow. I love that part of the story, right? And so this end of the story is that they took all of that and they sold the oil. And not only was it, this is a true picture of God's abundance above and beyond, because not only did they pay off the debt, they were able to live on it. It says, go sell the olive oil and pay your debts, and there will be enough left over to support you and your sons. They lived on it. God wasn't bound by time. He didn't just pay her debt. He took care of her. Isn't that a picture of the cross? Jesus didn't just pay the debt. The cross paid our debt for sin. The cross paid our debt back to God and gave us forgiveness and for righteousness. But it wasn't just a one-time deal. Okay, your debt's paid, now let's just go on. It was and I'm going to take care of you forever type moment. Right? God didn't just pay our debt at the cross. Then he made sure that we had perpetual peace, perpetual righteousness, perpetual forgiveness. It goes on and on. It's not just enough to pay the debt. We have this abundance of spiritual blessings that we can walk in. God's love is like this. It goes on forever. His peace goes on forever. His righteousness. I'm trying to think of other things, right? That it was perpetual. It wasn't just the cross. As a matter of fact, the cross was so powerful, it went back and took care of everything that had ever been committed from the start of time until the end of time, which God is still over from the beginning. He started the beginning. He started time. He created time. And there will be an end to time. But there will not be an end to God, because he is not bound by time. He is outside of time. And that's hard to fathom, right? But I love this story that, what do you have in your hand? God again took something very, very natural and did something very, very above natural, supernatural, outside the natural, outside the constraints of time. And he made a miracle with what she had in her hand. What do you have in your hand? I'm starting to ask myself that. What do I have in my hand? What do you have in your hand? Because God can take the natural and do supernatural things in our lives. And he can do it every day. He doesn't say, oh, I helped you yesterday, and I'm not going to help you. I don't know about today, because it's always today for God. He made the cycle of day and night, but that doesn't mean it's a day for him, right? All of creation he made in 7 days, but it was a day to God, not a day to us. And so we limit God sometimes, but God is there over and over and over. And he's abundant in mercy, abundant in grace, abundant in bringing the oil of the Spirit into our daily lives. Wow, this is an amazing story how God used something natural. Whatever you've got in your hand is enough for God to use, I promise. That's why we can trust him, and that's why we can peace out. Peace out, you guys. Have a great day. I can't wait to hear what you see God starting to do in your lives. It's going to be awesome to watch, right? Have a great day. I'll see you again tomorrow.